Introduction to Magic, Volume 1, Rituals and Practical Techniques for the Magus by Julie Savola and the Group. Chapter 4, Opus Magicum, Concentration and Silence by Luque. The possibility of achieving a complete theurgical and magical realization is based on the operator's direct and empirical knowledge of the spiritual powers that constitute the intimate essence of reality. This knowledge is attained by performing a ritual that helps to awaken one's faculties, whether unknown or neglected. He who, after choosing a path to follow, steels himself and is certain that his will shall endure when facing the many obstacles on the way, and when no moment of weakness shall deter him from his appointed path, he is fit to begin the ritual. In order to further clarify what is said about sacred operations, I will supply some brief references from magical and hermetic texts that may reveal many meanings, thus explaining the exact way in which the ritual operation should be performed. We should first say something about the essence of human nature, which must be correctly understood in the multiple variety of its external and apparent symbols and its verbal explanations. Agrippa wrote, "There are 4 elements that constitute the grounds of all material things: fire, earth, water, air, of which all earthly things are compounded, not by fusion, but by transmutation and reunion, and in which all things are resolved when they decay." These elements foreshadow, in the physical and apparent reality, the particular experiences of the operating spirit, whether it is conscious or not. For none of them is found in the pure state, but they more or less are mixed, and apt to be changed one into the other. This work of transformation is performed by fire, i.e. the spirit, that acts on the earth, i.e. matter, in order to actualize the perfect magistry, or the attainment of the stone of the wise. Let us remember, aurum igitur arificandi verum, unum solum principium esto. Gold is the one true and only principle of gold-making. The principle of perfectibility, dignification, and sublimation of the spirit is in the spirit itself, and it creates, or determines, if you prefer, within itself the conditions of the ascent. Do not think that this is an easy operation, especially in its initial double phase. This phase teaches how to first isolate the spirit, making it unassailable from any external influence, until, having perfected this state, it eventually acquires a new self-consciousness, with completely new ways of perceiving. The need for an assiduous and tenacious perseverance has been symbolized by the alchemists with the expression iron of the wise. This resolve is necessary in the operation before the composition of mercury, which will later be made to act upon the metals that symbolize the earthly affections. These affections, being gradually sublimated to the ultimate perfection of cosmic powers, heavens and planets, from the state of initial impurity proper to them, when they are mixed in the earth with substances foreign to them, can eventually join the essences of the sovereign artifacts, and even be identified with it in the perfection of the work. Concentration is the essential and the next most important faculty after the willful determination appropriate to the purpose. For those who are used to studying, it will be easy to concentrate, as they reconstruct the psychological process of attention that, in our case, is at first free from any object, In this, as well as in every other phase, they observe the general principle of applying themselves for longer periods of time and with increasing intensity. We should note here that concentration can be practiced in two ways. The first, which we may call external, has a purely cerebral and mental character. The second is essentially an act of the spirit. One begins by finding a quiet and silent place, trying to eliminate any external obstacle to concentration, and assumes the most comfortable and fitting position so that the body will experience the least discomfort and not exercise any muscular effort. Then, totally abandoning yourself, relax in a position of absolute rest. We recommend the use of an armchair with a high back and armrests capable of sustaining the full length of the forearms. One can even lie down with the head at the same level as the body facing eastward. In the case of several people practicing together, special guidelines must be observed. The initial theme of concentration is to become free from the habitual way of thinking and to feel one's thoughts as something real, fixed, material, massive, located in the mind, in the brain, as something condensed and gathered into its proper seat. Thought should be imagined to acquire such a density and consistency as to be grasped, completely dominated, and maintained outside the body. In this act, what occurs is a gradual separation between the conscious spirit, which is purely aware of what it is doing, and the act itself, which is something performed by the spirit, outside of the spirit, on another plane of density, endowed with another and different nature. The spirit, by concentrating in the tension of determining and feeling thought in such a concrete way, gradually detaches itself from it as a conscious act. For this purpose, many devices can be employed, such as mirrors. It is generally helpful to place one's thought at a certain distance away. The concentration of thought in the area between the eyes is the object of special practices aimed at specific purposes. Another method of concentration, more perfect but also more difficult, consists in not paying attention to one's thoughts, abandoning it to itself, until, being deprived of the vitality that it derives from attention, it remains inert, no longer capable of disturbing the pure act of spiritual consciousness. In this state is found silence. The double function, active and passive, of the spirit in this phase was aptly described by Philalethes. Est autem aurum nostrum duplex, quod ad opus nostrum expetimus, maturam puta, fixum, latonem flavum, quius cursive centrum est ignis purus, quare corpus suum in igne defendit, in quo depurationem recipit, ut nihil eius tyrannidi cedat, aut ab eo patitur, hoc in opere nostro vices maris gerit, quare auro nostro albo crudiori spermati foemineo conjungitur, etc. Our gold that we use for our work is double, namely, a ripe, fixed yellow latona, whose heart or center is pure fire. Hence it defends its body in the fire, in which it receives its purification, such that it surrenders nothing to its tyranny, nor does it suffer from it. This acts the part of the male in our work, by which it is joined to our white, cruder gold, as to the female seed, etc. The nature of the fire as animating spirit, and not as a particular element to be experienced, was thus described by Agrippa. Fire appears in all things, and through all things, and at the same time is nothing. For it illuminates all, yet remains hidden and invisible when it is by itself and unaccompanied by matter in which to manifest its proper action and thereby reveal itself. It is boundless and invisible, sufficient in itself for every action that is proper to it. It comprehends the other elements while remaining incomprehensible, having no need for any of them, able to grow through its own virtue and to communicate its greatness to the things that receive it, etc. In silence, the spirit, free from every bond, precipitated within itself, sees and knows itself. This happens through a succession of conscious perceptions that can be differentiated into 3 successive phases. At first, one has a clear feeling of isolation and solitude, in which the spirit floats, just as an inconsistent and airy mass floats inside a light, luminous medium. Gradually, one has the feeling of being submerged, sinking and descending into something that, instead of being more substantial, becomes increasingly tenuous. At the same time, one experiences a sense of dilating, as if one's surroundings slowly dilate, expanding to the infinite recesses of space. This is the first perception of the infinite. Deeper down, deeper still, the slightly luminous impression becomes feeble and eventually disappears. A thick darkness sets in, and also, at the same time, a vague and more defined awareness of the greater density of the dark region into which one is sinking. Then it seems that being, having become solid black, expands beyond its limits into the universe. This is the second perception of the infinite. The consistency becomes denser, more massive, and darkness almost becomes total blackness, up to a total opacity. The spirit sinks even more. At a certain point it stops, and the solidity is absolute. All of a sudden, it seems as if the enormous stony mass disintegrates, an instantaneous impression. And after that, a new abyss opens up underneath. The mass dissolves and the spirit sinks. This is an absolute vertigo in the spirit, which is vanquished only by the awareness of the self as an intangible, indestructible, tenacious, and victorious reality. Beyond this, the impression of darkness is one of a loose darkness, air darkness. The spirit still endures, focused, resolved to overcome the abysmal depths. It remains immobile. From the bottom, a new light shines forth, which, at first tenuous, becomes increasingly intense, until it is perceived in a watery consistency that melts and transforms the infinity of things into a milky ocean. Having reached this point, the sense of the spirit's infinity and unconditional freedom is absolute, and there is no better state to be enjoyed. Requiem adeptus es. You have attained rest. But do not think that one must remain in this way, in a state of absolute immobility, because although the first prerequisite of the most difficult operation has been performed, what still lies ahead is the constructive phase of the ritual, which is just as important and which leads to the knowledge and to the experience of purely spiritual ways of communication. The ritual teaches one to perceive the essence of things in their immediate reality, beyond formal appearance, by inwardly realizing the names of power and the signatures of things. Thus, the spirit will be perfect not only in potency, but in action as well. For a brief comparison with the alchemical tradition, we should note that in the text the above-mentioned phases of darkness are correlated to other symbols referring to the color black. Philalethes has beautifully described the above-mentioned phase in the 7th chapter of his Introitus. After exhaustively outlining all the properties of the active spirit and its determinations, its whence and wherefore. The reader who is particularly interested in this subject should refer to that text and try to understand the symbols in the spirit.